Okay, not to go on too long because I got cut off. my little my little tablet has like 32 gigabytes of total space, and an hour long video takes up a big chunk, like 7 or 8 gigabytes. Anyway, just this little quick part two. I won't go on too long, but I was kind of rounding it up. And these are, like I said, these are more for my edification than any viewership. So these can be pretty long and not easily digestible, but it's helpful for my testimony because I can look back on these in 10 years and be like, wow, what a sad guy I was. Sad and lonely and lost in my ruminations. But one man's ruminations is another's contemplations, right? What's the difference? But the thing is, I think I was talking about is, I wanted to hammer on again more succinctly is, since my practice has been kind of weak, not up to my standards, that has caused me a lot of suffering. And of course, as I was saying, like, the only way for my practice to be shored up is through community, and apparently through ordination. It seems like, to take on the full deal, because I've been flirting with it and toying with it for a long time, and then part of that is that resistance is like you have to submit, you have to surrender to it, and your little self sense of independence and autonomy goes out the window. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because as I've talked about with the choice anxiety and like trying to carve your own path like some pioneer, it's like, it's kind of dumb, you know? And I'm built more for communal enterprises, which is kind of funny, even why, like I said, I've taken inspiration from a few people, and like, folks like Swalo and whatever, and these folks have been living in a community, like I've said, but they still are kind of self-driven. They don't join an official thing. And maybe that's to their detriment. I don't know. The thing is, when you join something that's already established, you obviously have to give up some of your sort of talking points or ways that guide you. And of course, for some people, that's like for even let's say a Suelo, if he had decided 2 or 3 years into moneyless living that he was going to throw in the towel and just like join a monastery, what impact would he have had? Would he have had less impact? More impact? What's the more beautiful expression? Who knows? Who knows, right? It doesn't happen. Also, he started too when he was a little bit older too, so that was maybe not even an option. So it's not like everyone that's on the simple living spectrum can join any old thing. And that's even what's kind of funny too, is that was part of my bugaboo. It's like I'm already doing this. Like, why do I have to join something? It's like a weird kind of redo in a way. But as I've said, I'm not a monk. And I have both the advantages and disadvantages of that. And obviously, with the way I've crafted my life, I've probably been hurt by that more than anything. As I've often encountered people that are like, why aren't you like in a monastery? Like, this is hard mode, dude. This is hard mode. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm trying to figure this out. There's not a lot of great models for it. You know? That's the safety of joining an official thing, because you have mentors and advisors and brothers and sisters and whatever else that like kind of keep you in line, you know? Like there's no way, as I was talking about, if I was in some like if you join, if you ordain a monastic order, you're not going to be playing squad and blowing people up in a tank. There's no way they allow it. That totally goes against the precepts. And like they even functionally, like you're not going to have your own little personal computer and the blah 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 and the time and all this stuff, right? You just let all that go. But that's what's part of that process of the 10 years of this simple living, free agent, mendicancy, whatever. And even that mendicancy, which I actually retitled the video, so I was thinking I was going to call it free agent mendicancy or whatever, free agency versus ordination. But I think that's once again me reaching a little bit, because I've never really called it mendicancy this publicly declared. And I think that's a bit of a reach, because like the mendicancy, it can kind of exist outside of the mendicant orders, but not really. And especially not in the States. Like people don't have never even heard of this word. And they're like, what? You're a beggar? And then you have to, it's this weird position, right, that I'm in, where I have chosen this path that's kind of hard to pin down, and I get lumped in with just like simple living people, which is probably my closest approximation. Simple living volunteer guy, and there's a bunch of us. I always thought I was extra special because I was so extreme, but like on the spectrum, a lot of people are like in the 5 to 10 grand a year range. Honestly, it's like they're really living simply. So it's like kind of splitting hairs a little bit in terms of the money thing. And I never fully gave it up, so I can't claim that grand title. And that's not even something that, in hindsight, maybe was even that wise to even attempt. Because, like, every single person that's ever done that has gone back to using money. Because it's 2024, it ain't working so good. It's not the time of the Buddha. You can't, it's like an anachronistic thing. You can't just take stuff and leapfrog 2,000 years of whatever and then be like, oh, let's just do that. It's like a weird like appeal to tradition or appeal to how things were. Well, they're not like that here, so we have to adapt, which is part of the reason why like the whole paywall thing bugs me. But it's like we're not living in the time of the Buddha. There are lots of money's flying around to support all these things, because it's a lot more complicated than back then. I mean, you could just like, they could, which they often would, the Buddha's time, they would go off just in the trees and just hang out, just live there, because there wasn't like all this apparatuses of like land is owned and taxes and like the authorities and all this increasing complexity and red tape and baloney. So that's part of the concession, that modern day simple living, spiritual people, monastics and whatever have to contend with. So yeah, that's part of my journey. And this kind of reminds me too, like when I stopped being vegan a year ago, it did shake up a lot of like strongly held stuff, even though I think it was like kind of in error. And I've talked about that in my mindful eating, not veganism video, but it's like part of my reason why I stopped being vegan for a little bit was I felt like trying to do this uber simple living thing, and that is like a lot. It's a lot, I'm like already in this fringe living thing, and it's like a lot. And given like my lack of support and isolation, I'm just like, geez, is there some way I can be more easeful? And that's part of what I was talking about earlier in this video in part 1, where it's like I've been a trapeze artist without a net for a while, and but part of that problem is I didn't really allude to as well. It's like have committed so much. It's like you're a trapeze artist, brother. Like you can't come down. You're up there. You're committed. And some people would argue, well, you can come down. Like some of my other buddies have, like my buddy Fallon, who was part of Touching Earth and was like living super simply and like camping out in Forest Park hardcore, like, stealth camping for even a season. But then eventually, then eventually went to a monastery and maybe was on the track for like ordination in some right, and then decided to want to become more of a householder and is like a occupational therapist. So it's like that's the coming down from the high wire, down from the trapeze, coming down to more conventional sense. And some people have suggested it over the years. You know, that's like the ultimate off ramp. But to me, that seems foolhardy in some ways because, like, A, I don't want a householder life. I don't want a family. I have a vasectomy, for God's sakes. Like, I can actually create children. And that was part of that, even though I would maybe adopt or something. But actually, not. I'm really interested in adoption. I would more like if someone had kids previously or something. But at any rate, and then there's issues with the whole partnership thing and like nesting partners where it's like that's dicey. It's also putting lots of eggs in one basket because most people, sorry, you end up getting divorced. Like half the population, half the people get married, get divorced because people are complicated and things change. There's so much change. And the people that last for a long time are the rare exceptions, and the ones that last in a healthy way and skillful way are rare. So that's another reason why, like, the radical notion of the Sangha is really interesting. And even like this notion too of like, I want to try something different here. Because for my life, I've been this lay person, right? And that's maybe the big crux and the hardship is that I've been doing this weird, like I said, hybrid style of a monkish, simple living guy, which there's a lot of this example, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's like a wise move, given everything. And the wise, more skillful, more easeful, more nourishing move is to find an order and plug in, right? And that can be beautiful, right? And this is part of my midlife pivot, even you would say, not necessarily my crisis, because I think people that have crisis in a midlife is they didn't do anything around their Saturn return around age 30, which is almost like you would call that like a finding yourself maybe, or like a big like move. And for me, that was dropping out, right? And so I'm not going to drop back in to a conventional way of living, like get an apartment and live alone or something, or live. That just seems like dumb. that would be just totally stupid. No offense to people that are trapped in that system, but like, it's just not a good way to go. Leases and having to work 9 to 5s and all that, and doing what joyfully are you doing to even do that? That's the other really tricky part, and in fact was the hardest part about living conventionally, because I was always exasperated because there's paywalls to doing these joyful things, schooling and certifications and whatever, like massage therapy. All these people over the years, go to massage school. Okay, do you have 10 grand you want to give me? It's like it's fucking money everywhere. Excuse my language, but that's what's so exasperating. It's like when you're trying to live simply, there are so many doors cut off, and you have to be very like spry and on your feet and nimble, and it's kind of exhausting sometimes. Then just like, yeah, you go do this thing and then you get your deal and then you follow the steps that all these other people are doing all around you. So, and I think, and part of that is still, it's like an element of hubris. It's like, I want to be special still. I don't just want to be a massage therapist like everybody else, even though I think that's a noble calling. Maybe a little bit of a racket because They get you certified and they get you have to go through the channels and everything. And I've always been like a guy that's like, I'll give you massage by donation or for free, just because I have experience and I want to offer that. So I don't have to charge you $75 an hour or whatever it is, because I don't have all this overhead. But part of the problem is my overhead situation is funky, and it's breaking down, obviously, where I've been kind of stuck with my dad for too long, and that's part of my financial free agency, simple living thing strategy is getting weird or wonky when I don't have a great community around it to help it be more smooth. So it's like a humble pie. It's 2 years of humble pie. And, some of my friends might say, well, you just never got back out there. So, like, how do you really even know that this simple living thing can't keep working? Fair point. But I kind of did that in Portland, and if I couldn't, I mean, I want to know if it was kind of funky in Portland, like, I could. The only way I'm going to duplicate it is if I go to some place like the Garden or wherever else I can exist without being charged rent. That's this problem of like limited options. Where will I not be wrung out, as I was saying the other day, and being charged? Because there's this expectation as a human, pay your money. That's what's cool about when you actually fully commit to like the monk path. It's like a big signal visibly to be like, I'm not doing money. I don't have a personal bank account. Like, I can't tell you how I've wanted to give that up for so many years, but I felt uneasy and unsafe about it because everyone you see has this number above their head, and some of these numbers are in the negative because it represents their money that they personally have. But do you understand what amount of anxiety that brings to everyone? I mean, I'm sure some people obviously know this intimately, and I've had it too, because even when I first dropped out and I had like 4,000 or whatever in my bank account, I had this really cool feeling because I was only paying like $150 a month for rent, and it was like, wow, I can live on this planet and not have to worry about working for like a long time. Right? If you do the math, right? 4,000 into 150 a month, that was my only expense. And I had a little taste for a year or two probably before I had to start working again, where I was like, wow, this is what like having a trust fund is like or something. Because I had this money, right, that was stretched over many months and many weeks, right? Instead of this like month-to-month grind that people get just destroyed by. And it was a really beautiful thing. That was kind of like the thriving part of the dropping out, where it was like, wow, just by living very simply and having a little bit of money, paying a little bit of rent, I can have this easefulness. And that easefulness is still kind of with me in some degrees, even though it's been eroded through the last few years of more hardship. But I still haven't, the thing is, it's like I wasn't a trust fund kid, much to my chagrin. Because that's really what I also find sometimes, not necessarily trust fund, but like there's just some like money coming from somewhere, or like a safety net, a golden parachute for some simple living people. Not everybody, but I've heard the stories, I've met people. And it's like, damn, I wish I had that. Because then I really would be even more, like if I had a trust fund that was paying me like $1,000 a month or whatever it is, shit, I'd be way more loose and free about plugging into places and visiting and traveling, because I just would have this constant flow that I didn't have to hustle and finagle and whatever, right? What a gift that is. That's what's more frustrating even too, when people like my neighbor, even the dentist, I'm like, you've won the game already. You can stop. Like, you can sell your house and work part-time, like Doctors Without Borders or whatever. Like, you have all this money that you can joyfully live now independently. You can invest in stuff. Even people like, I have friends that invested in crypto, which it's crazy. Like, when I moved into the house, it was like $250 for one, and I didn't cash in then. But I mean, that's like so antithetical to my values too, that I didn't want to get embroiled in it. But I'm still paying the price because I'm still a layperson who has a bank account and has money and uses money. So it's like, the kind of practical thing is like, well, you get in at 250 and you will make 20, 30, 40, 50 grand off of that thing. If you, that's the key point, is you're not selling it constantly. Because, good Lord, I mean, once it would have hit 2 grand or whatever, I would probably be selling a bunch of it. And that's once again, it's like not really in my mind to get into that kind of, it's like playing, it's like, stock trading. It's the same kind of weird thing. But that still puts me in this situation where I am beholden to where I will be able to exist without paying rent, basically, or doing work trade. Which there's still places, but it's a little funkier. And even the thing is, I was thinking about this when I was, after I got booted off my last video, as it hit the limit. America is really big, if you didn't know. And maybe this is like something that people don't realize, especially if you're always lived here in the States. But like, just getting to these different places, these places are spread out all over the place. Like the Garden, Tennessee, 2,000 miles away. Now, like, some people would say, oh, no big deal, just a few days road trip. But still, it's like, if you're gonna be traveling to these places every few months or something, that's still a lot of mileage. And to me, that seems weird. And that's partly because of my homebodiness, but like, I think travel, and I've talked about this over the years, travel has been hyper normalized. It's expensive too. Like, I can't imagine these folks in their van life and these big old buses and stuff. They must be paying an arm and a leg for gas. And with the way collapse is ramping up, like, it's going to just get worse and worse. So you're going to have less travel. You're going to be more rooted into some of these communities. And then even then, like, I don't want to be traveling through like gross parts of the country, which there are a bunch, and the strip malls and the urban centers and the red states and it's like, it's not very appealing to me. If I was in Europe, that'd be a different story, where places are way smaller. You're going through multiple countries. There's a beautiful architecture and like an old sense of worth, and there's not as much blight. But like, yeah, but just in terms of, these places, figure like in England, and you were bouncing around in different communities, way easier. It's so small. It's compact, it's compact. And the compactness grows around itself, especially being an island. There's only so much you can do. You can't sprawl out as much. So like, if you're a traveling person and you're hitchhiking or whatever around to these places in your circuits, then that's like a lot more easeful thing. But a lot of these places that I have in my head, like Deer Park, Abayagiri, the Garden, even the Lama Foundation, they're all like hundreds and hundreds of miles apart. It's like, so, I don't know. I don't think that's that outrageous to be like, I'm not so enthused about a traveler culture. And some people just aren't travelers. It's apparently my case, unless there's some miraculous 11th hour shift in my 40s here. I don't think it's me. And this, once again, that goes back to the whole, becoming a monk or ordination versus the simple living thing. Because the simple living thing, it's like the pressure to be a traveler is very strong, because it's like, you don't just like join a place like the Garden and then just stay put, for the most part. Even though there's some people that like kind of hold down the fort in winter there, it's not very smart because it gets cold and gross. So it's not just only you're checking out the Garden. It's like, oh yeah, and also now you are becoming more of a traveler. So am I ready for the traveler evolution or even want it? And this is what frustrates me with some of the suggestions from some of my beloved friends who, and I've talked about this, I think, in my Are You Sure video. It's like they've been doing this for a long time and they've had this mastery and they've had this thing. So it's like I think they've forgotten. If you go back to like your first days of doing this, what was that like when you weren't a traveler and then you became one? And the thing is these folks, some of these folks were predisposed to that because they're extroverted and they just have a different energy and a makeup and a constitution. And they have different values or a thirst for adventure and traveling and exploring, whatever. Like I said, I think part of that is it's been hyper normalized in our culture when it's like kind of weird, I think, in some ways, to just for some folks to be traveling so much. I don't think traveling is bad in and of itself. I think it's important, but like the pace of some of these travels and like flitting from state to state every few months, it's a lot of movement. What are you losing in that movement is my question. Where if you're always on the go and you're never in one place for more than a month or two, how are you able to establish roots? Isn't there something to be said for people that root in and hold down these spaces? It's like, I don't know. I just like that. That's why, like I said, the monasticism is like more in line with with how I've been in my nature. And I'm sure if you polled a lot of these guys, they're definitely, a lot of these folks are more traveled with me. And that's the other thing I had about too is like, because of my practice and my disposition and my challenges, especially with like anxiety and whatever else, and there's like fear elements, it's like, I think that I would actually blossom as because the monks do some traveling. Like, for example, they just went to Vietnam, but they traveled together for one, in that wholesome vehicle as a Sangha. So that's different. And the other thing too, this is the other thing for me, and that's what's kind of nuts for people suggesting it, given my background and where I'm at right now even, is people that are like telling me to go on like this solo thing. And it's like so daunting. I tell you very truly, it's so daunting to be like, yeah, you're super depleted and out of it. Go hit the road and hitchhike. It's like, what? And it's also winter right now. It's like, even just physically right now, I'm not in the spirit. It's like dark. We just had a freaking snowstorm apocalypse. Everything's screaming at me, natural rhythm wise, just stay inside, stay bundled up, And the only time I ever feel like traveling generally is like the start of summer here in the Northwest, because even in the spring it's kind of gross and wintry, snowy, and wet. So that's part of the reason why. That's part of the reason why I'm not a traveler too, because I grew up here in the soggy Northwest, and the two people that I can think of even in my mind, where they grew up, California. It's much like Australians. I think people that, when the difference between Australians and the people that are born in Britain are very obvious sometimes, and that's just the weather. The sunshine and the weather produces so much. It goes so far. You get out, you run around, you're physical, you're active, therefore your body's more active, you're stronger. It's all these things. You're adventuring more with all these adventurous people. It snowballs. But when it's dark and rainy out and cold, you become a gamer. You became a homebody. You turn to books, you turn to media. Not necessarily the bad thing. That's just part of our condition or our character and our disposition. And some people can break out of that, and some people embrace it too, which I think I've struggled with. Because like I've said many a time in many posts on social media, it's like all my mentors are like traveler, vagabond, hitchhiker people, and I haven't even hitchhiked in 10 years of doing this. That's like a red flag. Even though I was going to hitchhike one time with a buddy, we were going to go up to a festival, and then somebody was also driving up there. So stuff like that will happen too, where it's like, well, what's easier? I don't want to stand on the side of the highway with all this noise and garbage for an hour or two or three trying to pick up a random ride. I mean, it's just like, there is an element of fear of hitchhiking but it's just not so easeful. That's mostly the thing. It's not very easeful, and there is more risk. And there's like you have to be hiking more, and if you have a pack that's like 40 or 50 pounds on, like me, I don't have an ultralight set up. It's not very easeful, you know. And my strength is to like honor my easefulness and my softness and my gentleness, actually, as opposed to going the other way and being this like real hardy, raw. I'm gonna hike all over the place and ruck around and like conquer, and it's too much, especially now, given everything I've said and where I'm at. It's like, it's too much. It's too much for me to take on. And it even came to a head because I was thinking about traveling with my buddy. As much as I love them, it's like, we built different. We're different trajectories. It's not going to happen. And be at peace with that. Because this is what's been challenging as this simple living guy, like I've said, who doesn't have a great roadmap and is looking almost in desperation, especially since I've been isolated. It's like, help me, I need some advice, and because I don't know how to skillfully do this anymore. And I think part of the thing is the breakdown is that these people, they got me here, right? But they can't take me further, sort of a thing too. So I have to figure it out myself. Or like with the Deer Park stuff, it's like, or it's time to hand the reins over to a smoother track. It's time to switch tracks here, as the railroad analogy goes. I've been rumbling around on some random track that's been a little sketchy. It's got some blind turns and whatever, as opposed to like I hit the Dharma switch, the ordination switch, and then smoothness, because it's laid out. Even from like a retirement perspective, which is not like, should not be a leading reason to join something, but it's also a practical angle where it's like, here it is. When you're old, they don't kick you out. Like in the military, you get forcibly retired, which is a key difference when they do things. They take care of you because you've given so much, and you're a senior person, and you're deserving of compassion, and they take care of you. Even like in the Franciscan tradition, there's like a retirement home they have even for some of these, like when you really need more personal care, there's even more of a level of that. So it's like, why does that have to be so hard? It's been very hard at times, and that's like this. Sometimes I wonder where I'm like, why am I so tense? Why do I have all this anxiety? Well, fuck, man. You've been living this free agent going against the system, and it's like arduous at times. And that's what's like I said, part of this humbling is like when I was tooting my horn in Portland, having that ego trip around it, I wouldn't want to admit it as much, right? Because if I admitted to myself like, ooh, this is a little reckless, this is a little foolhardy,